As the COVID-19 outbreak continues, resilience professionals find themselves facing unique new tests along with their everyday responsibilities. Case in point, cybersecurity. While organizations are overwhelmed with the sudden and varied technological needs of their employees, cybercriminals have found a perfect opportunity to attack. I'm Buffy Rojas Leach, Director of Communications for DRI International, welcoming you to the latest in our webinars focusing on the challenges the COVID-19 pandemic presents to the resilience field. Today, we're looking at the current cybersecurity landscape and the vulnerabilities being exploited. To provide his valuable insights, we are joined by New York University's Dr. Pano Yannakogeorgos. Dr. Yannakogeorgos is leading the launch of the new Masters in Science in Global Security, Conflict and Cyber at NYU's Center for Global Affairs. He joined NYU as a clinical associate professor after an 8-year career in government civil service with the U.S. Air Force, finishing his tenure as the founding dean of the Air Force Cyber College at Air University. Thanks for taking the time to be here with us today.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about cybersecurity and COVID-19, the current threat landscape. My name is Dr. Pano Yannakogeorgos. I'm a clinical associate professor at the Center for Global Affairs at New York University, and also leading the stand-up of the new Masters of Science in Global Security, Conflict, and Cyber there. Prior to joining NYU, I was the founding dean of the Air Force Cyber College and spent about 8 years working for the Air Force in research and teaching positions. So today, kind of wanted to give you an overview of the current threat landscape and how it's shifting, evolving, or more or less remaining the same when it comes to COVID-19. I'll be going over what some specific cyber tactics that we're seeing being used, and then give you an opportunity to kind of engage with some illustrative cases of the kinds of organizations that are being victimized and targets across the spectrum of conflict. But what I'm going to also do at the very get-go is kind of unwrap what we mean by cyber. I feel like the field is still new to many, and sometimes when we see cyber, we are talking about the internet, we're talking about a vast variety of different technologies. So to start, I think it's important to understand that cyber is more than just the internet, even though the internet is the most potent manifestation of cyberspace. One of the key myths of cyber is that it's this boundless entity that is not kind of binned into any geographic location. It doesn't have any laws and regulations to kind of shape human behavior within the domain. So that's one of the greatest myths, because the internet, when it first started, was this very open, free-flowing realm of communications in which very few people had access to. And as a result, there was a very small, trusted community of people involved in the development of the internet. That's where one of the biggest reasons why we have the kinds of cybersecurity threats and the ability to exploit individuals and organizations today. So the very basic layer of cyber is a geographic layer, which means laws regulate how technologies are used. Going up a notch, we have the physical infrastructure, the Wi-Fi routers, the cables that allow for information to flow under the ocean, and the actual hard copper wire fiber optics infrastructure that allows for information to flow over the internet. We also have the logical layer, which is basically the ones and zeros that come to most people's minds when they're thinking about cyberspace. That can include TCP/IP, it can include networking protocols within industrial control system environments and that kind of stuff. Then at the very top, we have the bit that confuses everything when it comes to investigating and understanding cyber. That's the cyber persona layer and the identity of the actual person or group of people that are orchestrating attacks. So the persona layer is an example of that is a shared account. And the identity is the person that's actually accessing the account. So that's one way of slicing cyberspace into different layers to help us visually kind of comprehend this invisible and mystical domain to many. Another way to split it up is to look at it through a lens of the different technologies and technological environments that exist, and linking those to specific business missions, organizational missions, business processes, etc. So in this slide, if you can think through the component level as being laptops and keyboards, the system being the laptops and computers that are being internetworked over the internet, and the mission level being the purpose of what the point of all this technology is. If you focus on the mission, you can start to prioritize the key terrain in cyberspace, or those pieces of infrastructure that have information that is critical to an organization's functioning, or equipment that is critical to an organization's runtime. So on the one plane, we have traditional IT. On the other plane, we also have operational technology, and there's a clear overlap between those technologies. On the operational technology side, we have engineers that run the show. On the IT side, we have your computer scientists and your IT department. And one of the greatest risks today is when organizations do not appreciate the technical complexity and the interdependence of the two sides, or they don't see themselves as being operational technology operators. So I'll give an example here that's not COVID related, but it kind of helps illustrate the linkage between these two domains. So on the IT side, an organization may have invested $1 million, $2 million in providing the latest, greatest firewall to the security side, to the cybersecurity shop within the organization. And that organization may have engaged an employee user awareness training so they don't click on malicious links and that kind of stuff. But let's say a hacker is targeting that organization and knows that there's a pretty significant risk to them being caught if they go after the IT shop in order to conduct a denial of service attack. They may decide to switch gears and go after the operational technology side because it's a lower hanging fruit. The same level of investment might not have existed there. So by OT, in this example, think of an HVAC system that cools the computers and the servers within a particular operating environment. In that case, the HVAC system might not be under the purview of a CISO. It might not be under the purview of the cybersecurity team, and it's just a low-hanging fruit that's open, and once exploited, can still have an impact on the IT system, because if you turn up the heat in the room or turn off the HVAC, then you can melt the servers and deny the service that the servers are providing to an organization. So that's just kind of the lens that I'm coming from when I'm thinking about cyber. It's increasingly important for organizations to really understand that IT and OT are very complex, interdependent environments, and the implications for that will kind of go through as we discuss. COVID. So in this time of the pandemic, sure many of your organizations have shifted to remote work for their employees. The biggest risks there are obviously the fact that employees are connecting using their own devices to corporate networks using virtual private networks or no VPN at all, storing information on their computers without having the same security protocols in place that might exist within an organization, and also being more vulnerable, as we'll see, to potential phishing emails that may cause them to have a that may cause the organization to have a larger attack surface as a result of employees working from home. One of the other risks is something that is not really that is an area of concern, but has not really been hasn't really caught the attention of many, is the increase of remote work also going into industrial control systems or that OT environment. And now we're talking about large-scale critical infrastructure operators who we are seeing increasing the ability for employees to VPN or get remotely into a control system from home, basically. So this chart comes from a search engine called Shodan, which is a company that basically scans the internet for things that are connected to it. And by things, I don't mean computers, or it includes computers, but mainly things like a Nest thermostat, hydroelectric plants, and other literal things that have an internet facing presence. So this critical infrastructure operators on the OT side have increasingly been shifting their operations into over the internet in order to reduce costs for maintenance of things that are geographically dispersed. And what we see during the COVID pandemic as well, there's been an increase to this remote work, which may not have been necessary before. So an operator may have had to physically go to the office and monitor devices remotely, but they would not have had to do so from home, which now we're seeing that kind of capability is increasing as well, which presents risks to actual physical damage happening over these remote instances. On the remote workforce side, we've seen a lot of COVID themed phishing emails. So these might come from entities that are trusted. So an email coming from, in the hypothetical example here, an email coming in from an attorney asking if they've been able to access a certain document with something that looks very legitimate and may require urgency. So we've seen a lot of phishing campaigns using that kind of method in order to entice a user to click on the email and then download the malicious software onto it. On the other hand, we have an example that's taken from a campaign that was going around in the United Kingdom that essentially tried to entice a broader spectrum of users to click on a link because they had become eligible for a tax refund. So masquerading as an email masquerading as an official government communication to citizens that are emotionally alert and whose emotions are heightened as a result of the pandemic and may not be as vigilant as they were otherwise to scams such as this. So a lot of phishing has been seen going on that is tied to different COVID specific cyber criminal activity. Another trend that we've seen is password spraying. So according to a UK National Cyber Center report, I'll back up a little. So cyber spraying refers to the use of passwords that are commonly known to be used. So there's a website out there called Have I Been Owned? And the website basically documents how many, what the most common passwords are on the basis of data breach passwords that have been discovered by hackers from various data breaches. So passwords like password or passwords like let me in are ones that are very common, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And they're all stored in this database. So what hackers are using is a new technique called password spraying, which attempts to kind of get over the fact, get over certain cybersecurity procedures that have been put in place. So an example of a cybersecurity procedure is if you try to go after one account and using a method called brute forcing, that account might automatically lock you out after 3 failed attempts to access the system. What password spraying does is it takes the common password, it takes the username lists, and instead of targeting one account within an organization, the cyber criminals will use common passwords against specific accounts for 1 or 2 times. So if you get failed attempt on one account, you jump over to the next account with the same common password until you finally get the user that is using a common password. So what it does is it prevents the automatic lockdown and mitigates some of the detection of brute force methods. So the UK National Study Cyber Center report showed that people are using passwords that are commonly known. And during this COVID time, when everyone is shifting to remote work, it's more important than ever to have a password that is not on the common password list. Organizations can take preventative actions such as preventing the use of those passwords, keeping their password policies in sync with the 10, 20, 30,000 most commonly used passwords so that a user cannot use such a password in order to prevent this kind of attack from succeeding. So one of the best examples of kind of shifts in cyber criminal trends during COVID-19 is ransomware. So if you take phishing, if you take the previous 2 examples of malicious cyber tactics, phishing and password spraying, what we're also seeing is a shift in how ransomware is delivered. So, or how hackers are using the access they've gained in order to deliver ransomware. So in the past, the trend has been that an actor will send out a phishing email and a user will click on the link and boom, they'll get a screen telling them that all their files have been encrypted, and if you would like them to be decrypted, pay X amount of US dollars equivalent worth of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. Unsurprisingly, this has been on the uptick during COVID, but another tactic that has been on the uptick is users that gain access to a network. I'm sorry, cyber criminals that gain access to a network are now taking advantage of the access, stealing files that they want or have been tasked to steal, And then after they've gained the access, they will conduct a ransomware attack with when they're all done with the corporate servers. So that's been the kind of trend that's been on the increase as well. It's not just ransomware via spear phishing, it's also ransomware after being infiltrated, exploited, and then as the final way to kind of gain money is to encrypt files on particular servers in order to then gain more money off the exploit. So worrying trend is that ransomware is on the uptick, and hackers are shifting from not just sending out emails, but also using existing access to conduct ransomware attacks. So now I'm going to kind of go through a spectrum of cyber operations and tie recent events to things that we see across the spectrum of operations. So the chart here shows a kind of list of typological kinds of cyber operation, motivating factors for a cyber operation or cyber hacker to use. So one is an access operation, basically gaining access in order to exploit a system. Cyber disruption, think of an actor that's trying to interrupt the flow of information via distributed denial of service disruption, or ransomware as another example of a cyber disruption, and then finally an attack. So an attack being something that equates to a cyber physical event that causes loss of life, physical destruction, or injury. So I'll give some illustrative examples here about things that we've seen with COVID related hacker attacks over the past couple of months. So cyber espionage groups have been targeting organizations for information about COVID. So China was targeted during the outbreak in order by hacking groups that were tied to another nation's government, so that that government could understand what was going on within China. We've seen similar attacks targeting the World Health Organization, where hackers are just that are tied to both state and non-state entities, that are just trying to learn what different organizations have, what information different organizations have on the virus. We've also seen pharmaceutical companies being targeted, companies that are doing vaccine research in order to aid intellectual property theft, and gain a competitive advantage in research and development of a vaccine. So those are two kind of high-level espionage threats that are coming out of that are part of campaigns that are tied to the COVID outbreak, and different organizations trying to gain access to information that they would like. Example of disruptions. One example of a cyber disruption is malicious applications that are designed to encrypt a user's phone that's running Android in order to ask for ransomware. So this example here is, and I won't name the website in order to avert any curiosity, because if you do visit the website, you will more than likely get an increase. There will more than likely be an increase to your own cybersecurity risk by going to the site here. So, according to DomainTools.com, which is a domain name tracking service, there have been websites. There's been an uptick in domain name registrations for websites that are COVID related. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. In this case, the website is specifically targeting people that want to know about where coronavirus is in their community, and it entices them to download a app onto their phone that, if it gets downloaded, it requests system administrator privileges in order to gain features that are not normally available unless you give administrator privileges to your device, to this particular app. And then once you give the administrator privileges, your entire phone gets encrypted, and you get the screenshot on the right here asking for about $100 worth of Bitcoin. So lots of COVID related scam websites out there promising cures, but cyber criminals have also been crafty in their efforts to not just attack people via phishing scams in order to gain access to their financial information or to encrypt their drives in exchange for ransomware, but also developing applications that are intended to take advantage of people's desire to learn more about the virus in order to aid and abet criminal activity. There's been another worrisome development in that, in the midst of the COVID crisis, there was an alleged intrusion on Israeli critical infrastructure, or in this case, civilian water treatment. So this story broke on May the 9th. It was first reported last week, but the details started to emerge a couple of days ago. So the allegation here is that a state-sponsored threat group targeted a piece of critical infrastructure that is usually protected even under international law, existing international law. So just something here to kind of alert that, hey, it's not just cyber criminals that are taking advantage. There are also critical infrastructure operators who are out there who may have more around the world. That may have more entities that are targeting them in order to gain a foothold into pieces of critical infrastructure for future use, or to cause some kind of disruptive attack today that would just be catastrophic, especially as healthcare resources are being strained. So that spectrum is just a useful way to think through different kinds of cyber operations. But where it gets really blurred is when it comes to healthcare, because healthcare is very tied to IT that controls medical equipment. It's a very sensitive area as a result of the potentiality of harm to human beings. So the Department of Homeland Security and the National Cybersecurity Center in the UK recently put out an advisory that advanced persistent threat groups are targeting healthcare and essential services. This comes about a month and a half after it seemed like hacker groups, a lot of the bigger, more organized APT groups were not going to touch healthcare. A lot of groups had come out, did a big declaration of how they were not going to target healthcare entities in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, and they would, some actually did take steps to decrypt encrypted devices and that kind of stuff as a kind of show of their better side when, and but it was recently revealed that that was a very early kind of assessment, and APT groups are going after healthcare and essential services. So the different kinds of risks are here on the slide. So it's not just phishing campaigns that might result in encrypted hospital networks. There was a case in the Czech Republic where a hospital there was targeted, and literally the surgeries had to be canceled as a result of that attack on the hospital. So there's a pretty fine line between a malware attack on the hospital that just aims to cause financial gain for the criminal enterprise versus one that can actually cause harm to patients within the hospital. Medical devices are connected to these networks, so there could be kind of second order effects of such malware campaigns within hospitals, with x-ray machines getting disrupted and that kind of stuff. Ventilators and pumps being disrupted. And then as telehealth becomes more prevalent, people's sensitive medical information may also be vulnerable as a result of these moves to telehealth. So a lot of restrictions within the United States, at least, on moving to telehealth were kind of put on hold, and it became easier for doctors to remotely talk to patients about their health situation. So the risk here isn't just on the doctor side, it's also on the patient side that may have been exploited by a malicious application or a malicious email, and now their healthcare information is also inadvertently being revealed as well. So in that spectrum of cyber operations where things go from access to kind of attack on the physical loss of life in the healthcare community, it's even more important to remain vigilant across all kinds of cyber attacks that are possible in order to prevent potential secondary or third order effects as a result of a cyber criminal that wants to gain money but inadvertently causes harm and loss of life as a result. It's not all bad news. With corona virus and cybersecurity overlays, there have been efforts to create more robust cyber information sharing mechanisms amongst people. So on the private sector, there's been a grassroots effort that has been quite successful called the CTI League, or the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, that really gained momentum during the COVID-19 response. So this league is about 4,000 members strong right now. It's trust-based, peer-to-peer community where not anyone can enter, but it's a way for organizations to informally ad hoc share information amongst themselves about what they're seeing on the cyber front without having to go through more rigorous information sharing channels. So the CTI League is one good grassroots effort to help share information amongst private sector and public sector stakeholders. We also have the Department of Homeland Security and the UK coming out with joint advisories. In the previous slide, it was an advisory that was specifically for the healthcare community. However, in early April, the DHS and NCSC in the UK put out an advisory about different malicious cyber actors and tactics that they're using to target the broader community, not just the healthcare community. So that's another really good resource to kind of go and gain details on not only the kind of strategic operational level, but also to get signatures for specific malware or indicators of compromise in order to help manage patches within organizations. Another, at least on the governmental side, on the US government side, there was a huge alert that went out in late April in mid-April, that was alerting the global community about an uptick in North Korean cybercrime activities. So the reason why North Korea is being highlighted here is because of the vast amount of money that it has been gaining as a result of cybercrime in order to evade sanctions. So North Korean hackers that have been tied to the North Korean government have been targeting organizations around the world for years now. This includes the WannaCry event, which had a huge impact on the National Health Services in the UK a few years ago through a ransomware attack. So the Department of Homeland Security issued out this alert in order to kind of highlight the fact that there are nation state sponsored activities that are going on, and just be on the alert for very specific tools, techniques, and procedures that are being used, and sophisticated efforts that are guided by North Korean hackers who are very advanced and very capable. So in addition to criminals and hacktivists, and also what I call amateur experimenters who are taking time right now while they're sheltering in place or staying at home to kind of experiment with cyber techniques. There are also nation state hackers that overwhelm even the most robust and sophisticated cybersecurity operations that exist today. So what can we do? They're not really new suggestions. These are more reminders of best practices, especially as we're shifting towards a remote remote workforce. So patch and update virtual private networks, network infrastructure devices, and devices being used to remote into work environments. So VPNs and personal devices are already hard enough to patch when you don't throw the unpredictability of someone's personal computer that may not be patched. So patch management is difficult even without the complexity that personal devices bring into the IT environment. So making sure that patches are prioritized maybe on the basis of VPN vulnerabilities, such as one in Citrix that was recently disclosed, would be a good way to protect an organization's critical information and crown jewels in an age of COVID. Using multi-factor authentication helps to reduce the impact of password compromises, whether it's through traditional brute force attacks or password spraying. If you add that extra layer of multi-factor authentication, a hardware token, for example, or an application that sends you a SMS or gives you a ring on the phone in order to confirm that it really is you trying to enter your digital account. These are very simple ways to, that's a very simple way to kind of increase the attack the cost to an attacker in order to kind of, for lack of a better analogy, to make them go to the next victim that may not be using multi-factor authentication. Protecting the management interfaces of critical operational systems is another thing that can be done. So the challenge here isn't the protection, but the identification of critical operational systems. So an example here is in a hospital environment, for example, there might be the medical equipment group and the group that stores patients' healthcare data. And both of those organizations are going to think that their assets are the most important within the organization. And as a result, the cybersecurity budget might not be going to what is actually important. The only way to really get to the bottom of what is actually critical within an organization is by getting multidisciplinary groups together from different departments and having group meetings to really start to prioritize what is mission essential to an organization and how the cybersecurity budget should be split up amongst the different entities within an organization. Review and refresh incident management processes. So right now, all continuity of operation plans in general are under a lot of strain because I think one of the anecdotal stories is not since 9/11 in the United States has there ever been such a strain on continuity of operations plans and other incident management processes because of kind of the level of impact that COVID-19 has had on organizations around the world. And this is really especially true in cyber, on the cyber front, because as things very quickly shifted to remote work, there may not have been enough time to think through how do you manage cyber incidences across a more dispersed population of workers. And finally, this should really be the first one, but I kind of left this one for last intentionally, is using modern systems and software. So software such as Windows XP that is no longer supported by Microsoft, which means you can't get any patches relating to the first point because the company no longer provides patches except for in really extreme emergency situations. Taking a slice of the IT budget and upgrading to modern systems and modern software is a good way to increase the security of your organization, because now one of these cyber amateurs might not be able to experiment with kind of very easy to use techniques, and the risk to an organization will from those low-level techniques will be eliminated and the cost of the attacker will go up as a result. However, it's also a good time when, as companies start to shift to modernize their systems or upgrade their software to the latest versions offered, it's also a really good time to focus in on designing the system securely. So if, for example, you're a small organization that is using old laptops and you decide to replace your 10 old laptops with 10 new ones, make sure that whoever is kind of creating this new system is baselining everything, is putting the right security policies in place and other kind of things that if you do it during the design phase, it becomes less expensive later on, because cybersecurity incidences will have a less likelihood of going through if security policies, procedures are put in place. So with that, I would like to open this up to any virtual questions you might have, and I'd like to thank everyone for your time, and hope you all continue to stay safe, healthy, and well during what's an unprecedented emergency, healthcare emergency. So with that, to open it up for any questions. So our first question is, what type of organizations are the favorite targets? So there was a recent study done by CrowdStrike, which is a US-based cybersecurity firm, and surprisingly, the most impacted organization, according to the study, was the US education community. So institutions of higher learning and other educational organizations. So that's the favorite target right now. It's surprisingly not healthcare, according to this study. So we have another question that is asking for COVID-19. We had WHO, the World Health Organization, championing the cause. What do we have in the cyber landscape today? Or are we in a jungle of little spheres and at the mercy of the bad guys? So within cyber, there is a general problem of governance. So there's a really good map that Joe Nye, a professor at Harvard University, put together called the Regime Complex for Cyber. And this map shows all the organizations that are involved in some aspect of governing the domain. So if we think through to that first slide that I showed with the different layers of cyberspace, there are different organizations that have some aspect of governing. So at the protocol layer, there's the Internet Engineering Task Force that creates standards for cyber, that creates standards with security in mind for telecommunications protocols. Where we are today, there is no one singular entity like the World Health Organization that can champion the cause for cyber because of how complex the domain is and how young this field is in comparison to other fields. So in healthcare, there was a long evolution of that profession that went from basically having no standards, no unified curriculum for creating medical professionals to now a very heavily organized field within around the world that allows for the emergence of an organization like the World Healthcare Organization to kind of bring data together and report to the world about what they're seeing. There are computer emergency response teams that kind of serve as good points of contact for data sharing. However, computer emergency response teams, or CERTs or CSERTs, computer security incident response teams, are not all created equal, and not every country has the capacity to have a world-class computer security emergency response team because the human capital is not there. It's a challenge for well-developed countries as it is for less developed countries. So we're not at the mercy of the bad guys. It is a bit of a jungle when it comes to the different governance mechanisms for cyber, both at a technical level and also at a strategic level. But there are entities out there that exist in order to share information formally amongst organizations. So the next question is about the law. The pandemic is accelerating changes, but changes in the law do not have enough speed. What are some ways that governments can accelerate changes to laws that serve in the medium and long term to anticipate cybersecurity threats that appear every day? So that's a really good question. One, technology will always pose challenges to the law, whether it's cyber or artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, robotics, and that kind of stuff. So it's important to understand what bodies of law we have today and how you can apply them to technology before thinking through if we actually need changes to the law. So an example is within cyber is the emergence of the Budapest Convention for countering cybercrime. It's an EU level treaty that the United States and Australia also signed on to. So it's very specific, cyber oriented to help get rid of some problems that are kind of unique to the cyber domain, such as what is defining what a crime in cyberspace is. And that law in particular could be one that doesn't have to be changed, but more or less adopted by countries around the world to help calibrate and coordinate law enforcement responses to cyber events. Cyber changes quick, so that law was written in a time before the mass adoption of cloud computing. So that might be an area that legal experts might want to turn their attentions to now in creating more robust cloud computing legal responses and law enforcement in order to enable law enforcement to kind of follow the track of a cyber criminal that's hopping between virtualized cloud environments. The final question we have is, what do you see as the future of the virtual CISO and the benefits of being a certified CISO? So CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer. I think in terms of the future for anyone in the cybersecurity community or anyone aspiring to enter the cybersecurity community is very bright, especially as we're moving towards remote work. One of the challenges, and it's something that I mentioned during my response about governance, is that there's not enough human capital out there in order to meet the supply, or there's not enough human supply in order to meet the demand for cybersecurity. And as more organizations move to remote operations or they become more and more digitized, there will be a need for individuals to enter the workforce. The problem is that it's hard to determine what skills an individual actually has in cyber, and that really goes to the second part of the question about the benefits of being a certified CISO. There are companies out there that will educate and train their people in order to get a CISO certification. And what that does is really helps to signal to future employers that that individual has mastered concepts in order to kind of create a baseline of or a standard, a baseline standard within within any cybersecurity skill. And then at the CISO skill, in the CISO certification space, it's not only enough to kind of go and pass the exam, but you also have to demonstrate through work history, job positions, employer referrals, that you do have the skills it takes to be a CISO. So it's a very rigorous process to get a CISO certification. And it's a good way to kind of ensure that an employer knows what knowledge, skills, abilities, and competencies you bring into that role. And that was the last question. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope you all continue to stay safe and healthy.
Thanks once again. I think you've given us all a lot to consider. If you're looking for more resources to strengthen your organization's cybersecurity, we recommend our Cyber Resilience for the Business Continuity Professional course. It's an information-packed 4-day experience that will provide an understanding of how to address cyber disruptions within a BCM framework. You'll discover how BCM and cybersecurity must integrate within every organization using the 5 elements of cyber resilience: prepare, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. It's also the first step to earning our new DRI credential, Associate Cyber Resilience Professional or Certified Cyber Resilience Professional. During the pandemic, we are providing our courses online through Labor Day. You can register now for our upcoming course on July 27th to July 31st. Follow the link on your screen for more information. If you still have questions that we didn't cover, give us a call at 866-542-3744. A recording of this and all of our webinars is posted at drii.org. I'm Buffy Rojas Leach, and this webinar has been a production of DRI International 2020, all rights reserved. Thanks for your attention.